I think what's going on is college football's coming. We had a conversation with our college football editor and our college football ace Bill Bender that we published yesterday, involving little different predictions, like what'll be the biggest contender for the Heisman that's not a quarterback. And one of the questions was, what's the biggest September game aside from Clemson, Georgia? And I was shocked, guys, that I was the only one who cited Indiana versus Cincinnati. I think that game is enormous with what's being expected of Cincinnati going into this season, coming off their undefeated regular season last year, and the great game they played in the Sugar Bowl until the final 90 seconds. And then, of course, the Hoosiers coming off their best season in goodness knows how long, and coming back with so many of the players that made that team so successful. It's an enormous division point for those two teams. For Cincinnati, if they want to stay in the playoff hunt, and look, they're never getting in the playoff. Don't get me wrong. They could go 100-0, and that ridiculous committee is not letting them in. But if you want to stay in the hunt, and there's two different things there, then they have to win in Indiana. And for IU, if you want to talk about the biggest bowl games, that's a big game for them to win. That, look, Bearcats, whether or not they beat Indiana or Notre Dame, they're going to have a great year. They're going to do well. So that would be a great win to have on your resume if you're the Hoosiers.
I agree with you. I think that the game loses, if any, luster from those people because they still see Indiana as Indiana. They're not a team like Cincinnati, who doesn't really have that schedule, doesn't have any tradition either, but they can do things like Central Florida and become darlings and accepted quickly. But a team like Indiana, they've got to do 3 times as much to get over 100 years of this stigma, I guess, because they haven't done it. And they've shown, and these last 2 bowl games have not helped them. You lose 2 bowl games that you should have won. So that I think that sticks in the national pundits' minds. They just kind of see that, and they don't see a lot. And that's kind of how I see it. But I agree with it. Indiana's way better than a lot of people think. Indiana always, their games on TV with the Big Ten, over the last few years, some of the highest rated noon games were Indiana games. Indiana, Michigan, Indiana. They play good games with these teams, and I agree. I think it's gonna be a spectacular game. That there's no telling how great that game can be.
Well, they played
non-conference matchups.
They played some of the most exciting games of the 2020 season. The game against Penn State was breathtaking for everyone involved. And the game against Ohio State, Buckeyes had to come back. So they played some fantastic games. And as I said, that Bearcats Georgia Peach Bowl, I may have called it the Sugar Bowl, I may not, but anyway, the Peach Bowl. I always keep thinking, because it was indoors and dark in there, that it was the Sugar Bowl, but it was really the Peach Bowl. And that was a fabulous game. It was really well played and really enjoyable. And then Georgia pulled it out in the end when Cincinnati kind of wobbled a little bit in the final 90 seconds. But those have been great games. So I really fully expect Georgia versus Indiana to be one of the really interesting games of the college football season. And I'm just tweaking my guys a little bit. They went with the bigger brands, but I think that's going to. I really think it's going to be an important game that's being overlooked.
Well, it's a non-conference game, a big non-conference game early, and there usually aren't a ton of big non-conference games early, especially if a potential top 10 matchup. If Indiana beats Iowa, they're probably going to jump. I don't know if you can jump 7 spots, because that's going to take a lot of movement there, but top 12 matchup at the very least, probably. That's pretty good for week 3.
And hey, let's be honest. I mean, there haven't been a lot of those games at IU in Bloomington. I mean, because they haven't been in that position very often. So I think it's really thrilling to see that that's coming to Bloomington, and I'm sure that the Bearcats are focused on that. For the nature of their schedule, that's a huge game for them. And then they have to follow that up with Notre Dame, but they're fortunate in that they have 2 weeks in between. They have plenty of time to get ready. So it's not like they get banged in the head twice in a row. They get, they've got a very difficult game against IU. If they're lucky enough to survive that, then they got a huge game at Notre Dame. But again, they have some time to prepare. So I think it's exciting. And this is, this sort of reminds me of why the college football playoff needs to expand, and why, why I talked before about Cincinnati's never going to get in there. Well, not in this format, but in the 12-team format, they have a chance. I mean, they'd have to obviously do the things that I talked about, but they'd have a chance. One of the other questions that we debated, what will be the most fascinating conference race that we have in college football in 2021? And I said the Pac-12, because whether or not Alabama is going to win 12 games is not that fascinating. I mean, it may be on a particular Saturday. If it gets close, that might be fascinating. But in toto, it's not, because they do it every year. Clemson, same thing. You want to have these races where, like we were talking about before with the baseball, you want to have different people having a chance. That's what makes sports interesting. And that's what college football has abdicated. They have given up on that. There are people that have been brainwashed into thinking that it would be so awful if the playoff had an 8-3 or 9-3 team in it, or an 8-4 team, or whatever. The whole point of sports is to compete. If it's not just to watch Alabama roll up 12-0 records with 12 first-round draft picks. That's not what really we watch sports for. Maybe the Alabama Crimson Tide fans do, but competition and the look. If I want to see something that's great, that I know how it's going to turn out, I'll turn on AMC and watch The Godfather for the umpteenth time, because it's still great, and I know exactly what's going to happen at everything, but it's still great. But I watch sports because I don't know what's going to happen.